I want to talk directly to Kristen, aka Colonel Kurtz. That's not doxing, by the way. She uses her real first name in her videos all the time. Anyway, so recently, if you've been following the matters closely, you'll know that Colonel Kurtz has emerged as a prominent YouTube blogger commenting on the Johnny Depp and Marilyn Manson cases, and in a supportive role for both of them. Her muckraking in both of those cases has been so exemplary and so important that Marilyn Manson's own legal team has used some of her video content as evidence, such as the Poll of Ice interview and that sort of thing, in their own legal proceedings. She has certainly attracted a great deal of controversy, as you would expect, and she has shouldered that controversy admirably. Nevertheless, she's done something very, very, made an extraordinarily bad move, and that is that she has now interviewed a woman who is a former member of NXIVM, the self-improvement cult of personality founded by and led by convicted fraudster and sex criminal Keith Raniere. She's started interviewing this woman from a sympathetic standpoint, and she's asked a few challenging questions, but by and large, she has done a friendly interview with this woman, allowing her to try to make some kind of case that Keith Raniere was allegedly mistreated in some way by the government, and trying to make a case for his innocence, which is absolutely ridiculous. Keith Raniere is not innocent. It is blindingly obvious to anyone who stops and actually looks at the man's objective track record that he is completely guilty. He is a completely vile human being, and he deserves to be locked away in jail. But even more so than that, Kristen, this woman that you're interviewing is using some of the very persuasion techniques and tactics that she would have learned in a cult like NXIVM on you. Right there as they're doing it. I want to talk about all of that and more, but the main thing I want you to take away from this, Kristen, is that if you care about Johnny Depp and you care about Marilyn Manson, which are two issues I care about, you cannot be getting on board with defending Keith Raniere and defending NXIVM. Because here's the thing, Kristen, you say you don't care about your public image or what the haters say and all that, and maybe you don't, and to a certain extent I would say good for you for not caving into that sort of pressure and everything. But here's the thing, and consider this a very strong, very firm observation from someone who's considering himself the loyal opposition in all of this. If you go down this road of defending NXIVM, you are going to hurt your credibility with regards to Marilyn Manson and Johnny Depp, and because you are such a large and prominent figure in this matter, you are going to also potentially hurt their legitimacy as well, especially because Marilyn Manson's legal team has used your video content in their defense proceedings, in their legal proceedings, both defensive and offensive. So what's going to happen is, Kristen, you are a very prominent target for people who want to attack and take down defenders of Johnny Depp and Marilyn Manson. And what you are doing, Kristen, what you are doing here is handing them all the ammunition they need to discredit you by appearing to offer an even-handed platform for a Keith Raniere supporter to come out and try to defend him. What they are doing is they can now say, they will now be able to publicly discredit you by saying that far from merely calling for justice to be done in the face of, for two men who have been unfairly maligned by the court of public opinion, that you are now in the business of defending a convicted fraudster and a convicted sex criminal. And they are going to use that to paint you as unreliable, as sexist and misogynistic, and agenda-driven, driven by an agenda not to establish justice, but rather to just naysay all accusations against all men, no matter how blatantly confirmed they are. And that is such a prominent concern, Kristen, that it honestly makes me, someone who has enjoyed your videos and supported your channel, makes me wonder if that's really been your intention all along. That is how concerning it is. Kristen, I only know you from what you present on your YouTube channel. I don't know who you are, where you come from, and so I have to be conscious of red flags as they present themselves. And honestly, Kristen, the fact that you would interview this woman is a red flag. Now, people might be tempted to say, well, all she's doing is presenting an opportunity for someone to stand up and give their side of the story and that sort of thing. Well, if she is so hopelessly naive or if she and you are so hopelessly naive as to believe something like that, or go along with something like that, then I will refer you back to my previous statement. Right now is certainly not the time to do that when we are very precariously advocating for justice in the Marilyn Manson situation. Now is absolutely not the time to publicly shit the bed with regards to your public image. There is a lot more riding on this than just you, Kristen, and your channel, and you know that. And I think you understand the responsibility that you do have to these issues that you care about. Now, here's the thing. What's amazing to me, I want to talk a little bit about what's been going on here, or what's discussed in this interview. First of all, this woman, you have to understand, Kristen, this woman is a practiced expert in persuasion, in manipulation, in business negotiation, in all of these things that NXIVM teaches. She was, by her own admission, for a decade and a half, she was a high-ranking, well-versed member in NXIVM. She knows all of the tricks. Kristen, I promise you that this woman did not, she says she discovered you via your philosophy videos. Kristen, I promise you she did not. I promise you that what happened was she looked at your videos and saw that philosophy was something you cared about, was your personal interest above and beyond the videos about Johnny Depp and Marilyn Manson. And she chose to lead with that because it would personally ingratiate you to her and ingratiate her to you. That is why she led with that. Come the fuck on, Kristen. Do you really think that the woman who has an active and ongoing interest in exonerating her personal messiah, who is a convicted sex criminal, arrived at your channel because of your philosophy videos? The philosophy videos that, by your own admission, Kristen, get a decimal point of the viewership of your videos about Manson and Depp and all of that. Are you really that naive? I don't think so. Now let's go through a little bit more of what she talks about. First of all, one of the first things she gets to, she almost completely she dismisses the first question right out of the gate, and instead goes through a long process of praising Kristen and talking about a whole host of other unrelated things. Doing this, again, further ingratiates her to Kristen. This is intended to make it more, this is intended to place more social pressure on Kristen, thereby making it more difficult to ask penetrating questions because she would now be violating an established rapport that they have. She's using the social contract against Kristen. And when she finally does get back around to the actual question, it's a very paltry, shallow answer to the question because she already knows that she's averted your initial interest from it. So now she can redefine what an acceptable answer is to the question. So the next thing she tries to say, she tries to point out that there were only, so a little context for everyone that's watching, within the cult of NXIVM, there was a smaller organization called DOS. DOS was a secret women's group. It was presented, it was something that was only opened up to a small handful of women. Now, throughout this interview, maybe it comes up in this unaired part 2 that we're going to see later, but Allison Mack is never mentioned. Put a pin in that name because it's important. Anyway, so but she points out that there were within DOS there were 100 members, and only a small handful of those 100 members were having sex with Keith Raniere. So Keith Raniere, by the way, was the only male member of DOS, and it is highly, that alone makes it highly suspect. But this woman that's being interviewed tries to say there were 17,000 members of NXIVM, and only a few of them were having sex with Keith Raniere. So NXIVM's not a sex cult. That is a straw man argument, a straw answer. No, not everybody that was participating in NXIVM was part of Keith Raniere's disgusting sex cult, but the NXIVM was being used as a recruiting ground and a grooming ground for the women that ultimately participated in it. So, no, not everyone that was a member of DOS was having sex with Keith Raniere, but enough of them were. And the thing is, every woman that was invited to participate in DOS was required to submit nude photos of themselves as "quote unquote" collateral, so that they could even find out about what DOS was before they. And you stop and think about this, Kristen. You are not this fucking naive. No organization that is above board and operating ethically requires you to submit nude photos of yourself to be kept on file in case on file just to find out what a new sub-organization within the larger whole actually is. And that's really disturbing, Kristen, because you described it in your response to that. You described it as sounding like the kind of thing you would have that would be a women's group at a local church or something like that. I'm not aware of any churches that are any local Christian churches that are requiring women to submit nude photos of themselves to participate in the local women's potluck dinner club or what have you. And if they are, they need to be investigated. There is absolutely no reason for that to occur. And throughout the whole interview, what this woman does is she tries to dance around the reality of the collection of nude photos. She does everything she can. She calls it a commitment device. She said it was to set a consequence for your actions. Now, setting a consequence for your actions sounds like they were entering into it with the understanding that there would be a consequence based on the use of nude photos if they didn't behave correctly. But most tellingly, most importantly, this woman you interview says that there were women who submitted collateral and were allowed to leave DOS without having that collateral exposed. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. The purpose was not to keep them in DOS. The purpose was to keep them from becoming a problem for DOS. Yeah, yeah, they're allowed to come and go, but here's the thing. them deciding that they don't want to participate in DOS and leaving, that in and of itself does not present a problem for DOS. In fact, DOS benefits from that, because then they can, as you were saying here, point out that, oh, these women are allowed to come and go and their nude pictures were never released. Right, because that's not the point, because that has the added benefit of making it look like, oh, this is totally trustworthy, because there are all these women that departed that had nothing used against them. So, anyway, one of the big things, though, that this woman does is she tries to say, she uses a lot of talking about her techniques. For example, she says most of the testimonies against Keith Raniere were from former lovers, and she uses that to dance around the fact that, yes, in fact, Keith Raniere, there are people who testified very damningly against Keith Raniere who were not his former lovers. And so that use of the word most is a weasel word. Then she goes on, and now one of the interesting things that she does, and this is right out of the multi-level marketing, self-improvement cult type playbook, is when she talks about sex trafficking, the first thing she says is, now, what do you think of when you think of sex trafficking? What that's doing is that's getting you thinking about, yes, there are, if you say sex trafficking, most people will think of rather extreme examples of people being, herded naked into boxcars and taken off to, things like in the movie Taken and that sort of thing. Really extreme things like that. And what that does is that gets you thinking of the most extreme possible things, so that you will think that what actually occurred was somehow less significant, or that the application of that the words sex trafficking were improperly applied. In reality, the term sex trafficking has wide-reaching and significant implications. You think about it. You think about it this way. Think about like assault, for example. The word assault carries with it very significant implications. Implications like, broken bones and blood and bruises and that sort of thing. But patting someone with an open hand inappropriately still falls within the rubric of assault. Legally speaking, these terms have much wider reaching implications than just what you, the layman, would associate with the more sensationalized concept of those terms. So right there, she's already trying to delineate from the reality and the severity of what Keith Raniere actually did. Another thing that she does is she talks about how only one woman testified, or only one woman brought charges against Keith Raniere. That is glossing over the fact that statements from his other victims were used in sentencing guidelines, and that's not actually an uncommon practice. The same thing happened with Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby was ultimately only convicted of going after one woman, but depositions from the other victims who would have been unable to bring charges themselves due to statutes of limitations and things like that were used in the court to reemphasize the urgency and the importance and the significance of what he did, that his actions had wider reaching effects than just this one woman in this one case. So that right there is also just a huge red flag in terms of this woman's legitimacy. But one thing that she pointed out was she talked about the government weaponizing a media narrative against this poor innocent man, or weaponizing a media narrative, and with the implication against this innocent man that was just trying to help people. Okay. This is what cult members always do in the defense of their leaders when their leaders get brought down. This is always what they do. Look at what happened with Scientology. You know, look at what happened with Scientology. Scientology's thing for years was to say that the government just hated L. Ron Hubbard because the government was in bed with the psychologists, and so the government was coming after this supposedly innocent man that just wanted to help people. And that has been something that they pumped out to their followers for decades. It was their basis of their public image campaign to benefit L. Ron Hubbard. This is something that cults do all the time. There are, to this day, Branch Davidians that will tell you that David Koresh was just this kind-hearted man that wanted to help these people, and the government just stormed Waco with no good reason and all of that. Jim Jones used the same defense to convince all of his, or the same propaganda and the same line of attack to convince his own flock to commit suicide. This is what people in cults do to defend their leaders. Anyway, so but the big red flag in terms of DOS, I already talked about this a little bit, was that they had to submit nude photos of themselves just to participate. And this woman goes around in the most ridiculous roundabout ways trying to make it sound like this is somehow an acceptable practice. And when Kristen asks her point blank if she agrees in retrospect that it was a bad idea, she only can allow herself to say that she realizes it was a bad idea for some people. And so that's yet again another cult technique. If it doesn't work for, if what we did to you doesn't work for you, then we put it back on you. You're the person with the problem, not us. Okay, the next thing that this woman does not talk about at all is Allison Mack. And again, there's going to be a part 2 to this video. Maybe she'll talk about it there. But the thing was, it was not just Keith Raniere who was charged with sex trafficking, human trafficking and sex crimes. Allison Mack was as well. Allison Mack was Keith Raniere's personal squeak toy, his sexual plaything. She was very much under his spell. She was very much manipulated by him. And she ran the DOS program. And the reason, what she did with the DOS program was to recruit women so that she could then evaluate them to find out which ones would be best transferred to Keith Raniere for his private sex cult. No, she did not use all of the women in question for no, she did not use all of the women in DOS for Keith Raniere's sex cult. Believe it or not, it just it really, or the best way to describe it would be like a sales funnel. Think about it this way. Most of the people who, in advertising, there's such a thing as a sales funnel. And what that means is there will be, if you post, for example, an ad on social media, there will be, say, 5,000 people who see the ad. Within that 5,000, there will be maybe 1,000 who click on it. Within that 1,000, there will be maybe 300 who read the whole thing and click through to purchase the item or whatever's being sold, or ask for more information, sign up for the newsletter, ask for more information, that kind of thing. Within that, and these are actually very generous numbers for a sales funnel, I'm just using them to make a point. And within that, you'll have maybe 150 people who actually buy the item in question or something like that, or sign up, purchase the service and that sort of thing. That's how a sales funnel works, and that's what they were doing with NXIVM. NXIVM was recruiting women for DOS for Keith Raniere's freaky sex cult was not the only thing that NXIVM was doing, but NXIVM was an opportunity for NXIVM events did provide Allison Mack with an opportunity to meet with and ingratiate herself to potential prospects who then were invited to take part in DOS, required to submit nude photos of themselves as a means of buying their silence. And then from within that group, the most gullible, the most easily manipulated ones of that group were then subsequently ferreted off to become sex slaves for Keith Raniere. And yes, and the thing is, you talk about all of these things somehow being voluntary and all of that. Well, one of the things that was established was that Keith Raniere used very coercive and manipulative control over these women, such that they were being manipulated into committing to larger and larger things without fully understanding what was going on. All of this was gone through in the trial. And so, again, she goes through, again, I keep pointing out, she keeps going through all these things. It was the purpose of the nude photos was to practice accountability and things like that. Again, all of this is complete bullshit. There is absolutely no reason to collect nude photos of members of your organization unless the nude photos are something that are being circulated. You know, you could say, like, I don't know if there's a swingers group or something that wants to, where the people are networking with each other on the basis of wanting to meet for sex or something like that, something above board. There is no reason to motivate people by collecting nude photos of them, except to have the implicit suggestion of threatening to release them. So it goes on and on. I'm just going through things crossing out things I've already talked about. She claims that there was a men's secret group. To my knowledge, that's never been corroborated anywhere, but the next obvious question would be, was there a similar collateral program in that? So then finally in the pornography claims, the claims about pornography, so Keith Raniere was convicted of child pornography. He was found to have nude photos, sexual photos of a young woman who was 15 at the time that the photos he took were taken. And she claims that, her claim is that the metadata, she claims that the metadata was tampered with, the metadata which would establish when the woman was, or when the photos were taken and that sort of thing, for digital forensic analysis. She argues that that the metadata was changed. And so here's the thing, or at the very least that it could be changed. Look, here's the thing. Every major court decision has a truther movement of some kind associated with it. That's why you have to tread lightly when you take either side of a case like the Johnny Depp or Marilyn Manson cases, because whichever group is, whichever one of the support groups is vindicated in court becomes the legitimate one, and whichever group is not vindicated in court becomes the truther movement. And so every court decision has a truther movement associated with it. For example, you know, there is a truther movement associated with Charles Manson. There's a documentary called Charles Manson Superstar that was put out by a major occult icon named Nicholas Schreck, who, I won't lie to you, I'm a fan of his music. I don't share his belief system, but his music is really good, like the album The Illusionist, anyway. But, you know, Nicholas Schreck put it out decades ago. It's called Charles Manson Superstar, and it's supposed to reveal the shocking truth about Charles Manson, trying to present the argument that he was wrongfully, you know, he's targeted by the government and wrongfully convicted, etc., etc. One of the things it points out in that video is that Charles Manson was not allowed, and this is true, Charles Manson was not allowed to have his testimony heard by the jury. The government took the jury out of the courtroom and did not allow, not only, I don't mean they didn't hear it in person, I mean they didn't hear it at all. Charles Manson testified to an empty room. and then they brought them back in. That was a very controversial thing to do because they were concerned that Charles Manson was so charismatic and so manipulative that he might be able to sway the jury. Now, certainly that in and of itself is a miscarriage of justice. That should not have occurred, but there is tremendous, tremendous evidence to support the reality of what Charles Manson was doing. And even if the question comes down to whether or not he specifically ordered the Tate LaBianca murders. That question is something that people have analyzed for decades. But at the end of the day, it's not hard to figure out that it's not hard to come to the realization that Charles Manson was an extremely charismatic, extremely manipulative individual that had a lot of people under his thumb, and those people were whatever happened in the Tate LaBianca murders, those people were clearly acting under the guidelines of Charles Manson. Irrespective of specific orders he may have given, those people were acting on his whims and on his dictates and that sort of thing. It's things like that. Another example is in the case of the West Memphis Three, the famous Damien Echols and his and company, the murders that were eventually, the West Memphis murders that were eventually overturned after the Paradise Lost documentaries brought so much attention to it. There are people out there to this day trying to prove that Damien Echols actually did orchestrate those murders. There's websites for it, all of that stuff, and they present all of these things that are supposedly extremely damning evidence that really just ultimately amount to anomaly hunting. And so in the case of Damien Echols, by the way, my all-time, there's one website that actually put out a thing, one of their explanations for why they think Damien Echols is guilty is they said that after he was released from prison and had his conviction overturned, he in the years since then, he's done absolutely nothing to try to find the real killer. Newsflash, it's not the job of wrongfully convicted people to find out who actually did the crime. Also, let's put you in jail for 18 years, wrongfully put you in jail for 18 years and see how much you feel like helping the local justice department do its job. Anyway, so she tries to establish that actually the case against Keith Raniere being sexually prevailing on those young women. One of them, it was not just the 15-year-old girl, there was also a 12-year-old girl. It is widely established. There's a great deal more evidence than what she presented. I'm not going to go into all of it here, but it was not simply based on the metadata from the photos themselves. She's flat out lying. Look, Keith Raniere was a well-known fraudster and con man before he started NXIVM. Before he started NXIVM, one of his scam businesses after another was getting shut down. One business after another was getting shut down by the government, getting shut down by state, local, and federal governments for different scams that he was running, for wildly unethical business practices. And by the way, The Vow is not the only documentary looking into NXIVM. Also, a documentary looking into something is not a legal case against somebody. Kristen, you already know this because you, as well as I, know that the Phoenix Rising documentary is not a legal document. It is not a legal court finding. It's one person's assertions. The same thing is true for The Vow and all of the other documentaries that have been made about Keith Raniere. What matters is that Keith Raniere was convicted in a court of law. See, this, and that's what I think that's the caution that you're throwing to the wind here, Kristen. It's one thing to defend Johnny Depp and Marilyn Manson, who were found guilty in the court of public opinion based solely on the accusations and had their reputations and careers ruined on without any kind of actual innocent until proven guilty trial process was put into place. It's very different to be defending someone like Keith Raniere. who was found guilty after an extensive federal investigation into his many, many crimes. This woman, this woman is, I have to think, assuming that nobody else is going to look into the NXIVM case or something like that, or actually dig into it, but it does not take a great deal of research to look into to find everything that was used against Keith Raniere in the court proceedings. The man is a con artist. The man is a sexual criminal. The man is a rapist. The man is a child pornographer. The man is a purveyor of scam artistry and educating other people in the art of manipulation and con artistry. He is a cult leader. He is a disgusting and vile human being, and he deserves to be where he is for the rest of his life. It's actually a very, very lenient sentence for what he really deserves.